in Madison. Good job. Yeah, there you go. Thank you to Linda Campbell for reading the Matthew 6 scripture. And don't you love Julia's video? So she's got 2 bottles of yellow, 2 bottles of blue, and you're sitting there going, what's she going to do with those? And it's never a disappointment. Thank you, Julia. Awesome as always. I have something in my pocket I'd like to show you. $100. And I think I'm speaking for more than just myself when I say I like the feeling of sitting on money. When I got $100 in my pocket, it just makes me feel better about myself, makes me feel a little more secure. I don't have to worry as much when I'm sitting on money. Actually, true story, I went to the bank yesterday and I said, could I take out a $1,000 bill? And they said, there is no such thing. I didn't know. What about a $500 bill? Could I take a five? No, there's no such thing. 100's as high as you can go. I don't know if you knew that. But I wanted a $1,000 bill because that would have brought a reaction from you. It'd be like, oh, $1,000. Man, I like sitting on money. It just makes me feel safe, makes me feel so secure. I think you know what I'm talking about. And money buys us respect as well, doesn't it? Man, I've never had so many friends when I go to Cuba. I got friends all around me. Have a peso. They know I have money. They laugh at my jokes. They serve me. I got friends everywhere. Money buys respect. It does. And not just in Cuba. Money buys respect wherever we are in the world. Ooh, I dropped it. Be careful with your money. Hang on to it. Whatever you do, don't drop. Excuse me. You got to be careful with your money, right? Hang on to it. Don't be like that grasshopper in that story who spent all his money in the summer, and then when winter came, he didn't have any food stored up. I don't even know if you know that story. The grasshopper and the ant. Hang on to your money, right? Money can be such a powerful force for good as well. We reported last week evidence of that. We reported last week from the finance team that so many people in this church are generous and give money. And those people know what good things can happen when they give money to people who need money. Money can be the source of miracles, can't it? We've seen that here over and over. I think it must be so strange for people who never give money ever. You know people like that. I know people like that. They have no idea what a gift it is to them as well as to the people they give. They somehow, I don't know what it is, they just weren't brought up that way. They just have never experienced what miracles can happen when we take money out of our pocket, the money that we're sitting on, and we give it to people who need it. It's the source of miracles. They've never seen the beautiful thing that money can be when it's used in that way. And so here's the question. This comes from Jesus. This comes from the text that Linda read, and I paraphrase, but here's the question. What's the most important thing in your life? That's what Jesus is getting at. What is the thing or the things that you're most devoted to? And what Jesus said, and this is what we're going to look at, and for many people, money is the most important thing in their life. Do you find that question hard to answer honestly? If you were sitting with 8 friends and you had that question before you, what's the most important thing in your life? And isn't there a sense that we have in our hearts that you know how important that is, but you're not going to say it. You say family, you say career, you say your health. But deep down, we give so much for money, don't we? Like we sacrifice family, we sacrifice relationships, we sacrifice time that we could be. It's like the song, that classic song, Cats in the Cradle. Do you remember that song? The cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when, but we'll get together then. We know what that's like. We know what it's like to sacrifice so that we have more power to spend. We give up so much for it. And at some point, Jesus wants us to stand back and say, is money controlling me, and then am I owned by what I own? That's the question. Because Jesus knows that God's chief competition to your trust and your devotion to God is your stuff. Look, this is a tough topic. I know it's a tough topic. It's tough talking about money sometimes. Teachers and preachers are treading on dangerous ground when they start talking about money. Jesus got into trouble all the time talking about money. Jesus went into the courtyard and he said, why do you invest in things that don't last? And everybody's going, it's money, Jesus. Jesus, you go ahead and talk about the Holy Spirit. That's okay. You go ahead and you talk about prayer. You go ahead and tell your little parables that everybody loves so much. But as soon as you start talking about my money, now you're getting personal. Jesus got into trouble for that all the time. And Jesus is like, look, do you see? Do you see the reaction that you have when I start talking about that? So you ask yourself that question. How important is money to me? And how is it affecting other aspects of my life, my relationships, my friendship, the time I have to help other people, whatever? Here are the two biggest problems that we can get into with regard to money as we're driving down the road of life. Here's the two ditches that we can fall into. The first one is this: consuming. Consuming. Everything that comes your way, you consume. 99.8% you consume. Because you think it's just all for yourself. It's my money, I'm just going to consume it. And our culture helps us to buy into this. Our culture says you need more. It doesn't matter what you have, you just need more, you need more. And then that's just our culture. We all know that. So if you make $50,000 a year, you spend $50,000 on yourself. If you make $100,000, you spend it all, you consume it all, and it's all for yourself. That's the one ditch that we can fall into. Here's the other ditch on the other side of the road as we're driving down this road of life. Hoarding, right? This is the other ditch that we can drive into because we're afraid of the future. It's like, what about if this happens? What about if that happens? And I don't know what's going to happen, so I'm just sit on it and I'm not going to touch it. Now, there's another word that we can use that is a synonym of hoarding, and here's the word: saving. Wait a second, I know. Don't shoot me on this. Like I am passing the buck, no pun intended. This is Jesus. We're going to look at this text. We're like, I save, that's a good thing. I'm responsible. I'm careful with my money. I never drop my money. I'm not like the grasshopper who spends all his money and then he doesn't have anything for the winter. I'm like the ant who works and saves, works and saves, works and saves. I'm the good guy here. Don't be mad at me. This is Jesus. But the reality is, for Jesus, both of those things, hoarding, saving, and consuming, come out of the same source. They're both self-centered. And for Jesus, they both have as their source the G word. Anybody guess? Let's put it up. It's not me. It isn't. This is Jesus. We're going to look at this text. The thing about greed is we never see greed in the mirror. Ever do we see greed in the mirror. We don't see ourselves as being greedy people. But if you put everything that Jesus said about greed, and you put that together, here's the definition of greed for Jesus. And this phrase actually comes from a study we did a few years ago. I think Don was a part of this. It comes from an Andy Stanley study. And here's the phrase that I remember, and a lot of us remember. The assumption is that it's all for my consumption, right? Makes perfect sense. We get that. That's not complicated. If anything comes my way, it's for my consumption. Now, if I choose to consume now, that's spending. If I choose to consume later, that's saving. But it's still all for me, right? It's all for me. It's all for my consumption. And it's all from greed. It's all from greed, according to Jesus. Now, let's look at these texts from Matthew 6. As we go down these verses, we all think to ourselves, this is what we think: how did he know? How did Jesus know that's how I feel? 2,000 years ago, I don't know. He's Jesus. Jesus knows things. But I also know that the more things change, the more they stay the same. The human heart is the same now as it was 2,000 years ago. As you go through these, you think, how did Jesus know that? Here's the first one. No one can serve two masters. We heard Linda read this. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. So if you want to follow the ways of Jesus, there is this conflict between serving God and serving money. Because God knows his chief competition to your devotion and your loyalty to him is your money. It's your stuff. And it's interesting here that the word money, I don't know if you noticed, but the word money is capitalized. And if you go back to the ancient Greek documents, the Greek word for money is nomisma. And in those Greek documents, nomisma is capitalized. I mean, I can see why God's capitalized, but why is money capitalized? Because the writers knew. Money is God to people. And so here's the conclusion that Jesus makes just a little bit later. And here's the words that are just like, how did he know? Don't worry. What are we going to eat? What are we going to drink? What are we going to wear? It rings a bell. Don't we just lay in bed worrying? And the most common thing easily that we worry about is money. We worry about money. And God's just saying, look, I don't want your worry about money to steal the joy I want you to have. I don't want worry about money to steal the peace I want you to live within. And if you're constantly worried about money at 3 o'clock in the morning, that means it's an indication that money is front and center. And that's not God's intention. What are we going to do? How are we going to live? And there's tension in the family. And God just doesn't want that for you. He goes on. For the pagans run around after these things. Pagan's kind of a funny word now, but pagan just means people who don't know who God is. So there's people here, Jesus is talking to people. The assumption is that you know who God is, and there's just people over here who haven't heard anything about that. It's not a derogatory term. But Jesus is just saying, look, you're acting like them. You're acting like them because they don't know. They don't know who God is. So it's natural that they would worry about it. And then this next verse gets to the crux of the matter. God knows what you need. God knows what you need. This is so huge, huge. The reason we often worry in our lives is because we're not sure that God knows. And there will be a tipping point, a defining moment in your life, is when you decide once and for all whether or not you believe that God knows what you need. Just think about that. If you believe with all your heart that God knows what you need, your orientation changes from self-centered to God-centered. Because you trust that God will give. Look, God knows that I'm trying to pay my bill. God knows that we're trying to have a family. God knows that I need a job. God knows I need whatever it is that you wake up worried about. Once you reach that point where you really believe that God knows, it is a defining moment in your life. Does God know? Does God not know? If the answer to that is yes, God knows, then you don't have to hoard. You don't have to spend your life sitting on a pile of money that you never actually get around to spending. He goes on, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all that other stuff that you're constantly be worried about is given to you as well. And so, here it is from Jesus. You got to put something else first. You got to reorder. And this is how we break the grip that money has on us. Seek first the kingdom. What's the kingdom, Jesus? Oh, that's easy. That's easy. People, relationships, kindness, sharing what you have with people around you. That's what changes the world. That's the kingdom that Jesus gave his life to bring into this world. People, relationships, kindness. And yes, this passage is about money. Obviously, it's about money. It's about sharing what you have in a generous way. But please don't miss the promise here. If we live putting love first and giving to others first, all that other stuff that we worry so much about will be given to us. A defining moment in your life is just when you get to the point where you say, even just if it's in your own heart, I believe that God knows. When you get to that point, you don't have to hoard anymore because the fear is gone. And you become God-orientated instead of self-orientated. I know, that's hard. I know it's hard. I don't have any, delusions about what this 13 minutes is going to do in your life. I mean, my prayer is that it'll just plant a seed, maybe. I mean, we are all raised in the work ethic. I mean, I identify with the ant a lot more than I do with the grasshopper. Work, save, work, save, work, save. And I know this is hard for us, but this is Jesus' teaching. Seek first the kingdom, and all else will follow. I just wanted to mention David Marsden. John's here today. John plays the bass. David is John and Joan's son, who we saw on Friday night. We haven't seen him too much. He's in his mid-20s now. A couple of years ago, I think he was maybe 20, he joined Canada World Youth. And I remember talking to him about that. He said he just wanted to sort of go out into the world, see how other people live, figure out how to volunteer that would be helpful to somebody in some way. And so he joined Canada World Youth, and he went to two places. He went to La Ronge, Saskatchewan. You don't know where that is, trust me. It's La Ronge? No, see? Really? 500 miles north of Saskatoon. And then he also went to a village in the Peruvian Andes, a small town called Pelca. And I'm talking to him about that. This was a couple years ago, and he said, when you go into places where people really have no money at all, and just really kind of a meager way of living, he says the first thing you learn from them is that community is so important. Community is really strong. And he said, people are so much less independent. And he said, I learned that's a good thing, to be dependent on people around you. In La Ronge, Saskatchewan, there was poverty and addiction and isolation. And he said, it made me realize that we all have so much money, like in most middle-class people in Canada, and yet we worry about money. We have so much, and we just have to figure out a way to share that money with people in our own country who hardly have anything. This is Canada that they're living in. They have nothing. And he said, I don't know much about the Bible, but I remember the passage, something about, am I my brother's keeper? And he said, I learned that I am. I'm my brother's keeper. And then in the Peruvian Andes, he said it was a whole different thing. It's being a part of a culture where there was no money. There was no money. But there was no worry. There was no anxiety. They had everything they needed. Everything they needed was the essentials and each other. They had this strong community. And there was no worry. There was no stress. There was no anxiety. They lived together and served each other in such a unique way because they weren't constantly worried about protecting their money. And he said, here's how I sum up my trip. He said, I learned we have to reorder and reorganize our minds to realize that we don't need all the stuff. All the stuff doesn't lead to any happiness. It's not important. But also to see that the stuff we do have is meant to be shared. So, that's it. How do we create a culture where we bring up young people to want to walk in that way? How do we create that culture where we bring up young people to identify this right way of living and to seek that way of living, to seek that kingdom? How do we do that? Because if they do, they realize, and we'll start to realize, that money very simply becomes a tool for the health of our community. Money, I'm just going to say that again because this is it. Money is only a tool to be used for the health of our communities. That's how Jesus would have described money. I paraphrase, but I think that's how he would have described money. I know this is a huge topic. I know that money is such a force in our lives. But maybe maybe this will plant a seed in your lives that you might just learn to think in different ways about money, and I know I'm working on that too. Each one of us is sitting on this. What we can choose is whether or not this controls us. And I'll remind you that there will be a day when this will cease to exist. And all that will be left on that day, well, Paul tells it best when he wrote, in the end, there's only three things that remain: faith, hope, love. The greatest of those is love. Hey, we have a song. It's about exactly this. We love to sing this. It's about putting the kingdom first. The words